Colleague Daytona Everett here at Live Now spoke with a legal expert who covers all things about employment law, talking about the contours and the different capacities and criteria for mandates like this with vaccines and what goes forward from here. How will this end? So here's that conversation from earlier.
Joined now by Joshua Black. He is an employment attorney out in Arizona. Joshua, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, Daytona.
Okay, so it's really been Chicago in the national spotlight over the past couple of weeks because the city and the police union have been going head to head on whether or not these police officers should be mandated to get the vaccine. So lots of new developments on that. We're hearing that 21 officers have been stripped of their powers and pay because of this. They said that they have not disclosed their vaccine status. What's the legality of all of this?
Well, that's a great question, Daytona, and it's one that obviously is currently disputed between the city and the mayor's office and then the Fraternal Order of Police in Chicago. In general, in Illinois, there's this idea of at-will employment. So generally, just like in Arizona, your relationship with your job is sort of a take it or leave it. It's almost like a dating relationship. So as to say, hey, you take me as I am. If either party wants to change, they can, and we can choose to take them or leave them. Now, that's different a little bit when you are a police officer like these folks here, because they have a union. They're under a collective bargaining agreement. And when you're working under a union, that gives you some extra benefits and it gives you some extra entitlements that other at-will employees in the state don't have. You almost have like a prenuptial agreement with your job, if you want to think of it that way. You have this long contract that says, hey, if we decide at some point we want to change policies or demote you or fire you or do this or that, here's what we would have to do. And usually we have to bargain it with the union, with with your representatives. We have to work it out, and there has to be some sort of agreement typically before they can take those actions.
So what about all of the benefits that these police officers have? Can they deny those to officers who've decided that they're going to go ahead and take an early retirement?
Well, that's a good question, and that's part of what's being disputed right now in the court. So there's this idea that there's a couple things the city is saying that they can do if officers don't comply. And I think it's worth noting that this isn't focused on the Chicago Police Department, of course. It's all employees of the city of Chicago. It's just the police department and the Fraternal Order of Police specifically that has had an issue with this. So that's why I'm focusing on them. But in general, there was a mandate that, all employees either get tested each week and provide those results, or, ultimately they get vaccinated and follow these requirements. As you mentioned, there's 21 approximately officers that we know of so far who have been taken off of duty. So they've been put on a no pay status. And that's really the first option that the city has threatened. And, they've taken that option with a few officers. They've said, hey, we're going to give you a chance to comply. If you don't, we're going to call you into a meeting with your superior officer. They're going to give you a direct order. Right. We're talking about police department. We have kind of like a military chain of command, your lieutenant, your commander, whoever that may be. So they're saying, we're going to sit you down with your commander or your chain of command individual, and they're going to give you an order that, hey, you need to comply with this policy. If you don't, they're not firing anyone. They're putting them on unpaid leave, presumably until the court issue is resolved and there can be a ruling one way or the other. If folks are saying they're going to try to retire and take, that early or tap into their benefits, that would be something that I think would be a little more questionable, and it would be a little more difficult to say that there's a legal analysis there that we can somehow stop those benefits or negatively impact them. If it's a benefit that's already been earned, and it's a retirement benefit that's been accrued, I think that would be something that would take a little more analysis to be able to find a way that would be appropriate. But again, as far as I'm aware, these are all things that are being floated. There's 2 lawsuits, one from the FOP and one from the mayor's office. So there's cross suits here where they're both accusing the other of not playing fairly. And ultimately, these are kind of some of the accusations and concerns that are being raised.
Yeah, it really has become a massive dispute. You talked a little bit about the possibility of things hitting court. What would you expect those court proceedings to look like?
Well, in a situation like this, where parties are taking a civil matter to a court and they're needing a decision soon, there's the ability for the parties to ask the court for something called an injunction, where the court can say, hey, before we get through a year or 2 years of legal fighting, which is how long lawsuits often take, we have to address 1 issue or 2 issues right away. We need to address, for instance, can they force people to take this vaccine, or can they force them to report the vaccination status? There's situations like that where there can be injunction hearings, possibly, and a judge could make a ruling on part of the issue. If the matter is under a binding arbitration agreement, sometimes parties have agreed in the past, again, going back to their previous contract, that collective bargaining agreement, but they may have mandatory arbitration or some sort of mediation that they would have to go through, where the parties could, in a less formal setting, try to resolve their differences.
Yeah, Joshua, we're seeing legal action being taken across the country, not just, of course, with the police out in Chicago, but many different employees, nurses at many hospitals who have taken legal action against these mandates. Do you see this being any different?
Well, I do. Most of the legal action that we've seen so far, or most of the concerns that folks have expressed about vaccination, have come based on things like their religious beliefs, or they have some sort of underlying medical condition that causes them to not want to get the vaccine. And that's where a lot of the legal analysis and dispute has been. What is the sincerely held religious belief that's required to say, hey, I don't want the vaccine because of my religion? Or what are the health issues that physicians would say, yeah, you shouldn't get vaccinated, you need something else? That's where most of these disputes have been focused on. Either you get vaccinated or you're fired. And people are saying, whoa, there has to be some accommodation for things like religious or health issues. This issue, to contrast with the police, is not apparently about that. It's not that these folks are not being allowed to have a religious accommodation or a health accommodation, or they even have a third option. As I understand it, that the city of Chicago has a conscientious objector option that can be selected. So they certainly have options to select that they don't want to comply. And they have these other, options as far as a sort of accommodation. But it seems that their dispute is really more focused on, hey, you broke our contract. You didn't go through the contractual process that you have to. Basically, you didn't give us enough of a voice in mandating this vaccine.
Taking a wider scope view at this vaccine mandate debate, how common is it? How many calls are you getting in Arizona of employees who maybe want to do the same thing, take legal action against their business, their company, that's moving forward with the mandate?
That's a great question, Daytona. And we're seeing a lot. There's a lot of folks who are concerned. Obviously, it's something that as a society, we really haven't dealt with, at least in our lifetimes. Having a worldwide pandemic and then having some sort of, certainly having a new vaccine. I mean, even with the Spanish flu or 1918, there was no immediate vaccine. So even for having pandemics, this is uncharted territory. So it's perfectly understandable that employees are concerned, that folks, are not 100% sure that the vaccine's safe. I think that a lot of folks feel that way, including folks that perhaps have the vaccine. But what is being weighed out in the workplace, and we see it on a national level with the federal mandates coming down and mandates on large employers, there's this idea being weighed out that we have individual liberty and we also have the society and the need to protect society. And so our laws are always a balance of those two somehow. You know, individual liberty would allow us to drive our car as fast as we want to go because it's our right to do that if we want to, perhaps. But we put laws in place that say, generally, yes, but hey, for society's safety, we're going to limit your right to drive fast because we want to make sure everyone's safe. So on these roads, this is the limit. These roads, this is the limit. That's how they're looking at these mandates. It's coming down from a public safety perspective, and it's being implemented through OSHA and these other public health agencies, these branches of the government, that their whole job is to keep the workers safe. And they're saying the best way to keep you workers safe is to have you all vaccinated. So it can be a tricky issue if you are one of the people who has a religious reason that you don't want to be vaccinated. If it's not just a general, I'm not sure about the safety, if it's a religious exemption that you feel that you have some entitlement to, perhaps you belong to some faith that really does not believe in vaccines or doesn't believe in some aspect of modern medicine. I mean, that would be something that you would need to have a conversation with your employer about or talk to a lawyer about. Also, if you have health issues, you know, so if you are immunocompromised in some way, perhaps you are on radiation treatment or something and your physician says, we can't inject anything into you, you know, you need to be in a bubble. That could be different too. And so that's where most folks that have concerns are finding a potential refuge right now, is either if they can tie it in with their religious beliefs or with something about their health. Beyond that, the law is pretty uniformly so far looking at this and saying public health versus individual liberty, and especially in employment where it's at will, where in most states, or at least in Illinois and Arizona, employers can break up with you for any reason, just like you can break up with your job. You can quit, you don't have to give notice. When there's that type of take it or leave it relationship, the government's even a little more standoffish to say, hey, if your employer says you have to do this, we're not going to stop them. We think that it's in favor of public health.
So for people who maybe don't qualify for medical or religious, and they say that it's more of a personal freedom thing, you know, what is your recommendation for them on whether or not to pursue litigation?
Well, my recommendation for someone who just has a personal objection to the vaccine would be to talk to an employment attorney in your area. Find a local employment attorney and talk to them about your situation, because every situation is unique. And it could be that there's something there that maybe there is some help for. Maybe an attorney could speak to you and find that your objection really is somehow connected to something like health or religious reasons. If it truly comes down to the point where it's just, hey, I don't like this, it's just not my ideal, I don't want to be vaccinated, then my best advice in at-will states would be you probably want to look for another employer that's not going to require that. You know, it goes back to that idea of you can break up with a partner if they change and you don't like them anymore. And for us in at-will states, that's our right too. So if all else fails, we can always choose to go out and find another employer that's going to treat us more in line with what we're looking for.
Yeah. And as you highlighted before, this is not a one size fits all situation. We're seeing some of these lawsuits be successful and then some denied within 24 hours. So it is nice to be able to clear up as much as we can as all of this is developing. Joshua Black, thank you so much for being on the show. Again, an employment attorney out in Arizona. We'll have you on again because I'm sure things are going to change.
Thank you, Daytona.